The morning sun cast long shadows across the crystal towers of Nexus Prime as students hurried through the corridors of the Galactic Military Academy. The academy was famous throughout the galaxy for training the best military minds from dozens of different worlds and species. Commander Veltar stood at the front of Classroom 7 Alpha, his blue-scaled hands adjusting the massive holographic display that dominated the center of the room. The Altarian commander was known for his strict teaching methods and his ability to spot talent in the most unlikely places. His yellow eyes scanned the room as students filed in for advanced tactical analysis. The classroom filled with the usual mix of species that made the academy famous. Four-armed Krillians took their seats near the front, their extra limbs allowing them to take notes while simultaneously operating multiple data tablets. Their gray skin and sharp features gave them a serious appearance that matched their reputation. For logical thinking, behind them sat the Mandari students, their large heads containing brains capable of limited telepathy. The thin tentacles that grew from their temples moved slowly as they communicated silently with each other. Their pale skin seemed to glow slightly in the classroom lighting. The Vorthok students chose seats along the sides of the room. Their tall, thin bodies and calculating nature made them excellent at mathematics and strategic planning. They rarely spoke during class, preferring to analyze everything before offering their thoughts. Near the back of the room, almost hidden, behind a group of taller students, sat a human girl. Her name was Hannah Kim, and she looked completely ordinary compared to the other species around her. She had dark hair pulled back in a simple style and wore the standard academy uniform. Her notebook was plain, not filled with the advanced technology that other students used. Hannah had been at the academy for 3 months, but most students barely noticed her. Humans were still relatively new to galactic society, having only made contact with alien civilizations 25 years earlier. While some humans had shown promise in various fields, they were generally considered average in most abilities. Commander Veltar activated the holographic display, and the room filled with the image of a massive space battle. Ships moved in complex patterns, firing weapons that lit up the darkness of space. The battle looked chaotic, but experienced military minds could see the strategies and tactics being used by both sides. Today we continue our study of the Great Convergence War, Commander Veltar announced. His voice carried easily through the room, commanding attention from every student. This battle took place 47 years ago, near the Helio system. Both sides had advantages and disadvantages. Your task is to identify the key tactical decisions that led to the final outcome. The hologram showed hundreds of ships engaged in combat. Some were massive battleships capable of destroying entire planets. Others were small fighters that moved like insects around the larger vessels. The complexity of the battle was overwhelming, even for the advanced students in the room. Taemin, a Krillian student, known for his aggressive personality, raised 2 of his forearms. Commander, the tactical patterns are obvious. The winning side concentrated their firepower on the enemy's command ships, while using their smaller vessels to disrupt supply lines. Several other students nodded in agreement. It was a basic tactic taught in first-year courses. Commander Veltar's expression remained neutral. Inadequate observation, Cadet Taemin. However, you are missing several important factors. Who else can identify additional tactical elements? Dujin, a Mandari student, closed his eyes briefly. The tentacles on his head moved slightly as he used his species' natural telepathic abilities to enhance his concentration. The winning fleet also used the gravitational field of the nearby planet to slingshot their reserve forces into an unexpected attack position. This allowed them to strike the enemy's rear formations while their main force was engaged at the front. Better, Commander Veltar acknowledged. The use of environmental factors shows more advanced thinking. The discussion continued for another 30 minutes. Students from various species offered their observations about ship movements, weapon selections, and strategic timing. Each comment showed the natural abilities of their species. The Krillians focused on logical sequences, the Mandari used their enhanced mental capabilities, and the Vorthok provided mathematical analysis of the battle statistics. Throughout the entire discussion, Hannah Kim sat quietly in her seat near the back. She occasionally wrote something in her notebook, but she never raised her hand or volunteered any comments. To most observers, she appeared to be struggling to keep up with the advanced material. Yuki Sato, a Vorthok student, glanced back at the human girl during a brief pause in the discussion. Like most of her species, Yuki was naturally curious about the capabilities of other beings. She had noticed that the human student rarely participated in class discussions, leading her to assume that humans simply lacked the mental capacity for advanced tactical analysis. Commander Veltar continued the lesson by showing different angles of the same battle. Each new perspective revealed additional details about the strategies being used. He explained how the commanding admirals had to make split-second decisions based on incomplete information, often determining the fate of thousands of crew members with a single order. Understanding warfare is not just about memorizing tactics, the commander explained. It requires the ability to think like your enemy. to predict their actions and to adapt your strategy as conditions change. The greatest military minds in galactic history shared one common trait: they could see patterns that others missed. As the class period neared its end, Commander Veltar assigned homework for the next session. Each student would receive archived footage from historical battles and would be expected to provide detailed analysis of the tactical decisions involved. The students began packing their materials as the class concluded. The Krillians organized their multiple data tablets with mechanical precision. The Mindari communicated silently about study group arrangements. The Vorthok students calculated the optimal schedule for completing their assignments. Hannah Kim closed her simple notebook and gathered her basic writing materials. She moved quietly toward the exit, avoiding the clusters of students who were discussing the lesson. Her presence went largely unnoticed, just as it had for the past 3 months. That as she walked through the corridors of the academy, Hannah passed displays showing the achievements of famous graduates. Admirals and generals from dozens of species looked down from their portraits, representing the finest military minds the galaxy had produced. None of the portraits showed humans, reinforcing the general belief that her species had not yet produced anyone worthy of such recognition. The human girl continued walking, her footsteps echoing softly in the vast hallways. She appeared to be just another struggling student trying to keep up with material beyond her capabilities. No one suspected that behind her quiet exterior, something extraordinary was developing, something that would soon challenge everything the galaxy thought it knew about human potential. The Academy's ancient walls had witnessed the rise of many great military minds throughout galactic history. Soon, they would witness the emergence of something unprecedented, a human who would redefine the very nature of strategic thinking. 3 days later, the students of Advanced Tactical Analysis gathered once again in classroom 7 Alpha. The morning air carried the usual buzz of conversation as different species discussed their homework assignments. Most students had spent considerable time analyzing their assigned battle footage, using their natural abilities to identify tactical patterns and strategic decisions. Commander Veltar entered the room, followed by an unexpected guest. Professor Jorik, the most famous Mindari strategist in the galaxy, walked beside him. Professor Jorik was a legend at the Academy, known for developing battle strategies that had saved entire star systems during the border conflicts of the previous decade. His presence in an undergraduate classroom was almost unheard of. The room fell silent as the 2 instructors approached the front. Professor Jorik was taller than most Mindari, with pale blue skin that seemed to shimmer under the classroom lights. The tentacles extending from his head moved in slow, thoughtful patterns that indicated deep concentration. His reputation for brilliant tactical thinking was matched only by his demanding teaching standards. Students, Commander Veltar began, his voice carrying the weight of authority. Professor Jorik has agreed to present a special assignment to this class. This opportunity is usually reserved for graduate-level courses, but he believes some of you may be ready for advanced challenges. Professor Jorik stepped forward, his large dark eyes scanning the room. When he spoke, his voice had the measured quality that made every word seem important. The assignment I am offering will test your abilities beyond anything you have encountered in your regular coursework. It involves analysis of actual wargame simulations conducted in our most advanced training facilities. The students leaned forward with interest. The Academy's advanced simulation chambers were legendary throughout the galaxy. They could recreate entire star systems with perfect accuracy, allowing military commanders to practice strategies without risking real lives or equipment. Only the most experienced officers were typically allowed access to these facilities. These wargames, Professor Jorik continued, involve multiple fleets, complex supply chains, and strategic decisions that unfold over weeks of real time. The simulations generate massive amounts of data, recording every ship movement, every tactical decision, and every outcome. Most military analysts require teams of specialists and advanced computer systems to study even small portions of this information. Du Jin, the Mindari student who had impressed Commander Veltar in the previous class, raised his hand. Professor, how much simulation data would each student be expected to analyze? Professor Jorik's tentacles moved in what experienced observers recognized as approval. An excellent question. Most advanced students in graduate programs can effectively process 20 to 30 hours of simulation footage. The tactical complexity increases exponentially with longer engagements, making analysis extremely difficult even for experienced military minds. Yuki Sato, the Vorthok student, spoke up next. What specific aspects of the simulations should we focus on? Resource management, fleet positioning, or strategic timing? All of those elements and more, Professor Jorik replied. True tactical analysis requires understanding how every decision connects to every other decision. A supply ship movement in Hour 3 might determine the outcome of a battle in Hour 27. Advanced military thinking involves seeing these connections across time and space. The room buzzed with excitement and nervousness. This was clearly beyond the scope of normal undergraduate work. But the opportunity to work with actual wargame data was incredibly rare and valuable for their future careers. Tae-min, the aggressive, Krillian student, spoke without waiting to be recognized. "Professor, surely this assignment should be limited to students with the mental capacity to handle such complex analysis. Some species are simply not equipped for advanced tactical thinking." His forearms gestured dismissively as his eyes swept toward the back of the room where Hannah Kim sat quietly. Several other students followed his gaze, and uncomfortable murmurs rippled through the classroom. "Perhaps we should establish minimum requirements," suggested Minho, another Krillian student. "Students should demonstrate basic competency before attempting work at this level." Professor Jorik's tentacles stiffened, a sign that the man was considering the suggestion seriously. "What do you propose as appropriate criteria?" "Species with enhanced cognitive abilities," Tae-min replied confidently. "Krillians with our logical processing, Mendari with telepathic enhancement, Vorthok with mathematical precision. Students from more primitive species might find this assignment overwhelming." The word primitive hung in the air like a challenge. Several students glanced toward Hannah, who continued writing in her notebook as if she had not heard the conversation. Her calm demeanor only seemed to reinforce the impression that she was unaware of her intellectual limitations. Commander Vel watched the exchange with interest but did not intervene. The Academy's philosophy encouraged students to challenge themselves and each other, believing that competition improved everyone's performance. Professor Jorik moved closer to the holographic display at the center of the room. "I will assign each participating student a different wargame simulation. The complexity will vary based on what I determine each individual can handle." He activated the display, showing a list of available simulations. The data was staggering. Some engagements lasted only a few hours, but involved hundreds of ships. Others stretched across weeks, but focused on smaller fleets. The most complex simulations combined both elements, creating scenarios that challenged even professional military analysts. This simulation, Professor Jorik pointed to one entry, lasted 47 hours and involved 6 different fleets in 3 star systems. Graduate students typically work in teams of 4 to analyze something of this scope. He moved to another entry. This engagement ran for 63 hours, with 8 fleets, but remained within a single star system. The tactical complexity comes from resource limitations and environmental factors. Then he highlighted an entry that made several students gasp. The simulation data showed an engagement lasting 847 hours, involving 12 different fleets across 5 star systems. The scope was enormous, far beyond anything typically assigned to individual students. This particular simulation, Professor Jorik explained, represents the most complex wargame ever conducted at this academy. It involved multiple phases of engagement, constantly changing objectives, and required commanders to adapt their strategies dozens of times as conditions evolved. No individual analyst has ever successfully completed a comprehensive study of this engagement. Tae-min stared at the data, with all 4 of his eyes wide. "Professor, surely no single student could handle something of that magnitude. The dataset must contain millions of individual tactical decisions." "Indeed," Professor Jorik agreed, "which is why it has never been assigned to an undergraduate student." The room fell silent as students contemplated the challenge. Even the most confident among them felt intimidated by the scope of the available simulations. From the back of the room, a quiet voice spoke up. "I will take it." Every head turned toward Hannah Kim, who had closed her notebook and was looking directly at Professor Jorik. Her voice had been barely above a whisper, but in the silent classroom, every word was clearly audible. Tae-min's forearms moved in agitation. "Surely you cannot be serious. The 800-hour simulation would be impossible for someone with limited cognitive abilities." Hannah stood up slowly, her chair making a soft scraping sound against the floor. For the first time since the semester began, she had the complete attention of every student in the room. "I said, I will take it," she repeated, her voice steady and calm. Professor Jorik studied the human girl carefully. His tentacles moved in complex patterns as he used his enhanced mental abilities to evaluate her confidence and determination. What he sensed puzzled him, but he could detect no fear or uncertainty in her mental state. "Very well," he said finally. "You will have 2 weeks to complete your analysis. The same deadline applies to all students regardless of their chosen simulation complexity." As the class ended and students filed out of the room, conversations buzzed with speculation about the human girl's chances of success. Most expected her to withdraw from the assignment within a few days once she realized the impossible nature of her task. Hannah Kim gathered her simple materials and walked quietly toward the exit. Behind her, she could hear whispered comments about her poor judgment and inevitable failure. She gave no sign that she heard any of it. She walked through the corridors with the same calm demeanor she had maintained throughout the semester. Other students passed her without giving her a second glance, assuming she was just another struggling student who had made a serious mistake. None of them suspected that the quiet, human girl had just accepted a challenge that would change everything. They thought they knew about her species. The next morning arrived with the usual bustle of academy life. Students hurried through the corridors carrying data tablets and simulation equipment, eager to begin their assignments. Word had spread quickly through the academy about Professor Jorik's special challenge, and many students from other classes gathered to watch the distribution of wargame files. Classroom 7 Alpha, filled beyond its normal capacity as curious onlookers squeezed into available spaces. The air hummed with excitement and nervous energy as students waited to discover which simulation they would receive. Professor Jorik entered punctually, carrying a secure data storage device that contained years of advanced military simulations. Each file represented countless hours of strategic planning, tactical execution, and detailed analysis by some of the galaxy's finest military minds. Commander Veltar followed behind him, his scaled features showing interest in how the legendary professor would handle the assignment distribution. Even experienced instructors rarely have the opportunity to observe Professor Jorik's teaching methods firsthand. Before we begin, Professor Jorik announced, his tentacles moving in slow, deliberate patterns. I want to emphasize the significance of what you are undertaking. These simulations represent real strategic thinking by actual military commanders. The decisions recorded in these files have been studied by professional analysts for years. He activated the secure storage device, and the room's holographic display showed a list of available simulations. Each entry included basic information about duration, complexity, and the number of participating fleets. I have carefully selected appropriate challenges for each student based on my assessment of your current capabilities. Professor Jorik continued. Some of you will receive shorter engagements with fewer variables. Others will face longer simulations with more complex strategic elements. Dujin, the talented Mandari student, received the first assignment. His file contained a 37-hour simulation involving 4 fleets in a single star system. The tactical complexity focused on resource management and environmental factors, playing to the natural mental abilities of his species. This engagement, Professor Jorik explained, requires careful analysis of supply chain vulnerabilities and the psychological factors affecting crew performance during extended combat operations. Dujin accepted the assignment with confidence, his enhanced mental capabilities already beginning to process the basic parameters of his challenge. Minho, the mathematically gifted Krillian student, received a 42-hour simulation featuring 6 fleets engaged in a running battle across 2 star systems. The complexity centered on calculating optimal positioning and movement patterns for maximum tactical advantage. Your assignment focuses on the mathematical precision required for coordinating multiple fleet movements while maintaining strategic coherence. Professor Jorik told him. Minho's forearms moved efficiently as he downloaded the simulation data to his advanced analysis equipment. His species' natural logical processing abilities made him well suited for this type of mathematical challenge. One by one, Professor Jorik distributed assignments to each participating student. The students received simulations that emphasized long-term strategic planning and statistical analysis. Other Krillian students got files focusing on logical decision trees and systematic tactical progression. Each assignment seemed perfectly matched to the natural abilities and cultural strengths of the receiving species. Professor Jorik's reputation for understanding student capabilities was clearly well-deserved. As the distribution continued, curious observers began to whisper about what assignment the human student would receive. Most expected Professor Jorik to give her something simple and short, perhaps a basic engagement lasting only a few hours. Yuki Sato, the thoughtful Vorthok student, found herself genuinely concerned about the human girl's welfare. During the past few days, she had observed Hannah more carefully, and noticed that the humans seemed to lack the obvious intellectual tools that other species possess. Professor, Yuki said, raising her long thin arm, perhaps we should consider the significant differences in cognitive abilities between species. Some students might benefit from assignments that account for their natural limitations. Several students nodded in agreement. The suggestion seemed reasonable and considerate, acknowledging the reality that not all species were equally equipped for advanced military analysis. Professor Jorik paused in his distribution, his dark eyes focusing on Yuki with interest. What would you suggest as an appropriate modification? The human student, Yuki replied carefully, not wanting to sound insulting, might find greater success with a shorter, less complex simulation. Perhaps something in the 10 to 15 range with minimal strategic variables. Taemin, never one to miss an opportunity to voice his opinions, added his own thoughts. Frankly, Professor, I question whether any assignment is appropriate for a species that lacks enhanced cognitive abilities. This course is designed for advanced tactical thinking. Other students murmured their agreement. The logic seemed sound. From From their perspective, why waste time and resources on a student who was clearly unprepared for the level of analysis required? Professor Jorik's tentacles moved in complex patterns as he considered the suggestions. His enhanced mental abilities allowed him to sense the genuine concern from some students and the dismissive arrogance from others. Your points have merit, he acknowledged. However, I have already determined the most appropriate assignment for each student based on my professional assessment. He turned toward the back of the room where Hannah Kim sat quietly, her simple notebook closed in front of her. Unlike the other students, she had no advanced technology, no data processing equipment, and no obvious tools for handling complex analysis. Ms. Kim, Professor Jorik said, his voice carrying clearly through the NISI and classroom. Your assignment is the Epsilon Sector engagement. He activated the holographic display, and the room filled with the details of the most complex simulation. In the Academy's archives, 847 hours of continuous engagement, 12 different fleets, 5 star systems, multiple phases of strategic evolution. The scope was staggering. Professional military analysts working in teams of 6 or more typically required months to complete even partial analysis of such complex data. Several students gasped audibly. Even the most confident among them felt intimidated by the sheer magnitude of what they were seeing. Professor Su Jin, a normally quiet Vorthok student, spoke with obvious concern. Surely this assignment exceeds reasonable expectations for any individual student, regardless of species. The data set alone, added Wu Jin, a Krillian mathematics specialist, contains more tactical decisions than most commanders make in their entire careers. The computational requirements would challenge our most advanced analysis systems. Professor Jorik maintained his calm demeanor despite the growing protests from the classroom. Ms. Kim specifically requested the most challenging assignment available. I am simply honoring that request. Tae-min stood up abruptly, his forearms moving in agitation. This is absurd. You are setting up a primitive species for public failure. The human will never complete even basic analysis of something this complex. She lacks the mental capacity, the technological tools, and the cultural background necessary for advanced military thinking. Furthermore, he continued, his voice rising with passion, allowing her to attempt this assignment wastes valuable classroom time that could be used for productive academic discussion. When she inevitably fails, we will all suffer the consequences of reduced learning opportunities. The criticism was harsh but seemed logical to many students. They had never seen evidence that humans possessed capabilities beyond basic intelligence. Setting impossible challenges seemed counterproductive for everyone involved. Hannah Kim listened to the entire discussion without changing expression. Her dark eyes remained focused on Professor Jorik, showing no sign of doubt or reconsideration. When the room finally fell silent, she spoke in the same quiet voice that had surprised everyone the previous day. I said, I will take it, she repeated simply. Professor Jorik studied her carefully, his advanced mental abilities probing for any sign of uncertainty or bravado. What he found puzzled him. The human girl showed no fear, no doubt, and no false confidence. Her mental state was remarkably calm and focused. Very well, he said finally. The assignment parameters are identical for all students. You have 2 weeks to complete your analysis and prepare a presentation of your findings. He transferred the massive data file to a simple storage device and placed it on Hannah's desk. The device seemed impossibly small to contain such vast amounts of information. I should note, Professor Jorik added, that this simulation has never been successfully analyzed by a single individual. Graduate-level teams working with advanced computer systems have attempted the task multiple times without achieving comprehensive understanding. Hannah picked up the storage device and placed it carefully in her simple bag. Thank you, Professor. As the class period ended and students began filing out, conversations buzzed with speculation and concern. Some students felt genuinely worried about the human girl's inevitable failure. Others seemed excited by the prospect of witnessing such a dramatic academic disaster. Tae-min gathered his advanced equipment with obvious satisfaction. This should end the question of whether primitive species belong in advanced courses, he told his Krillian friends. 2 weeks from now, everyone will see the clear limitations of human intelligence. Yuki Sato watched Hannah leave the classroom with genuine concern. The Vorthok student had developed a sense of responsibility toward the seemingly vulnerable human. She made a mental note to check on Hannah's progress over the coming days. Professor Jorik remained in the classroom after all students had departed, staring thoughtfully at the holographic display that still showed the details of the Epsilon Sector engagement. Something about the human girl's confidence intrigued him. Though he could not identify exactly what had caught his attention, Commander Veltar approached his colleague with obvious curiosity. Do you really believe she has any chance of success? Professor Jorik's tentacles moved in patterns that indicated deep thought and uncertainty. Honestly, I do not know. But I have learned never to underestimate unexpected possibilities. Sometimes the most surprising results come from the most unlikely sources. Meanwhile, Hannah Kim walked quietly through the academy corridors, her simple bag containing what most considered an impossible challenge. Other students passed her without a second glance, assuming she was just another struggling student who had made a serious error in judgment. None of them suspected that the quiet human girl was about to demonstrate capabilities that would force the entire galaxy to reconsider everything they thought they knew about her species. 2 weeks passed faster than anyone expected. During this time, the academy buzzed with constant speculation about the challenging assignments Professor Jorik had distributed. Students from other courses made regular visits to classroom 7, eager to witness what many expected would be a spectacular display of academic failure. The advanced students had spent every available hour working on their simulations. The library's analysis chambers remained occupied around the clock as Krillian students used their logical processing abilities to break down tactical sequences. Mindari students gathered in groups, combining their telepathic abilities to share insights and solve complex strategic puzzles. Jin had made impressive progress on his 37-hour simulation. His enhanced mental capabilities allowed him to identify patterns that less gifted students might miss. He had successfully mapped the flow of resources between fleets and predicted several key tactical turning points with remarkable accuracy. Minho had applied his species' mathematical precision to his 42-hour assignment. His analysis included detailed calculations of optimal ship positioning, weapon effectiveness ratios, and probability assessments for various strategic outcomes. His work demonstrated the systematic approach that made Krillian military thinking so respected throughout the galaxy. The Vorthok students had focused their natural analytical abilities on long-term strategic planning. Their presentations promised to include comprehensive statistical models and predictive frameworks that extended far beyond the immediate tactical decisions. Throughout these 2 weeks, nobody had seen much of Hannah Kim. She appeared for regular classes but rarely participated in study groups or visited the analysis chambers. When other students asked about her progress, she simply said she was working on her assignment. Most students assumed she had quickly realized the impossible nature of her task and had either withdrawn from the course or was preparing to admit defeat. The few who felt sympathy for her situation expected her to request a transfer to a less demanding assignment. Min had made his opinions clear to anyone who would listen. This whole situation proves my point about academic standards, he declared to his Krillian friends. Allowing primitive species into advanced courses wastes everyone's time and resources. Even Yuki Sato, who had initially felt concern for the human student, began to suspect that Hannah was simply too proud to admit her limitations. The kind Vorthok had offered assistance several times, but Hannah had politely declined all help. On the morning of presentation day, Classroom 7 Alpha filled to capacity. Word had spread throughout the academy that Professor Jorik's students would be demonstrating their analysis of actual wargame simulations. The audience included faculty members, graduate students, and curious undergraduates from multiple disciplines. Commander Veltar arrived early to secure a good viewing position. Several department heads had also come to observe, making this one of the most prestigious academic events of the semester. Professor Jorik entered the classroom with his usual calm demeanor, but his tentacles moved in patterns that suggested heightened interest. He had spent considerable time over the past 2 weeks wondering what the human student would present. Today, he announced to the packed room, "You will witness analysis of some of the most complex military simulations ever created." Each student has spent 2 weeks studying tactical decisions made by experienced commanders under realistic combat conditions. The first presenter was Dujin, the talented Mindari student. He approached the holographic display with confidence, his enhanced mental abilities having served him well during his preparation. "I have analyzed the Corvarian border engagement," he began, a 37-hour simulation involving 4 fleets and complex resource management challenges. His presentation was impressive by any standard. Dujin successfully identified 17 critical tactical turning points and explained the reasoning behind each major command decision. His analysis included psychological factors affecting crew performance and strategic implications of supply line vulnerabilities. The audience murmured approval as he demonstrated his understanding of fleet coordination and tactical timing. His prediction of the final outcome achieved 78% accuracy, which was considered excellent for a student analysis. "Outstanding work," Professor Jorik commented when Dujin finished. "Your identification of resource bottlenecks and their strategic implications shows sophisticated understanding of military logistics." Next came Min Ho, whose mathematical precision had produced equally impressive results. His presentation focused on the geometric aspects of fleet positioning and the statistical probabilities of various tactical outcomes. The Helix Nebula engagement, he explained, required precise calculations of gravitational effects and optimal firing solutions across multiple star systems. His analysis included detailed mathematical models that predicted ship movements with remarkable accuracy. He had successfully identified 63 separate tactical decisions and calculated their combined effect on the final battle outcome. His prediction accuracy reached 82%. The audience was clearly impressed by the mathematical sophistication of his approach. Several faculty members took notes on his innovative use of probability theory in tactical analysis. Exceptional mathematical framework, Professor Jorik acknowledged. Your quantitative approach provides valuable insights into tactical decision-making processes. The presentations continued with similar excellence. Each student demonstrated the natural advantages of their species, while showing genuine understanding of complex military strategies. The Vorthok students provided comprehensive statistical analysis. Other Krillian students offered logical breakdowns of tactical sequences. As the presentations progressed, the audience began to whisper about the absent human student. Many had come specifically to witness what they expected would be an embarrassing failure, but Hannah Kim was nowhere to be seen. Perhaps she has finally realized her limitations, suggested one faculty member quietly. Probably decided to withdraw rather than face public humiliation. Agreed. Another. Taemin seemed particularly satisfied by the apparent confirmation of his opinions about human capabilities. This proves my point exactly, he told his friends. Primitive species cannot handle advanced academic challenges. Just as the final scheduled presenter was finishing his analysis, the classroom door opened quietly. Hannah Kim entered, carrying only her simple notebook and a basic data storage device. The room fell silent as she walked toward the front. Her appearance was exactly the same as it had been throughout the semester. Dark hair pulled back simply, standard academy uniform, and the same calm expression that had characterized all her interactions. She approached the holographic display, with steady steps, showing no sign of nervousness or uncertainty despite the prestigious audience that had gathered to observe her. Presentation. Professor Jorik watched her approach with intense curiosity. His enhanced mental abilities detected no fear, no doubt, and no false confidence. Her mental state remained as puzzling as it had been 2 weeks earlier. Miss Kim, he said formally, please proceed with your presentation. Hannah connected her simple storage device to the holographic display system. The room's advanced technology seemed almost insulting compared to the sophisticated equipment that other students had used. I have completed my analysis of the Epsilon Sector wargame simulation, she said in her usual quiet voice. The display activated, showing the basic parameters of her assignment. 847 hours of engagement data, 12 fleets, 5 star systems, multiple phases of strategic evolution. Several audience members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Even seeing the scope of her assignment made them feel intimidated. Hannah stood calmly in front of the display, her simple notebook closed in her hands. She had no visible notes, no advanced technology, and no obvious preparation materials. The simulation began with Admiral Kren's First Fleet positioned near the Epsilon Prime system. She began, her voice carrying clearly through the silent room. What happened next would challenge everything the galactic community thought they knew about human capabilities. As Hannah began speaking, something extraordinary happened. The holographic display, which had shown only basic simulation parameters, suddenly exploded into detailed three-dimensional images of 12 different fleets positioned across 5-star systems. But this was not just a replay of recorded data. Hannah was reconstructing the entire 800-hour engagement from memory, building each scene moment by moment as she spoke. Admiral Kren's First Fleet consisted of 47 vessels, including 3 heavy battleships and 12 supply carriers. She continued, her voice maintaining the same calm tone. His initial positioning near Epsilon Prime appeared defensive, but the supply ship arrangement indicated preparation for extended offensive operations. The holographic display showed exactly what she described. Ships moved into formation with precise accuracy, their positions matching perfectly with the original simulation data that none of the audience had seen. At hour 12, Admiral Moore's Third Fleet began their approach from the Sigma Vector. Hannah continued. Most observers would consider this a standard flanking maneuver, but Admiral Mora's cultural background as a hegemony commander meant she was actually preparing a traditional encirclement pattern that would not become apparent until hour 6. Professor Jorik's tentacles moved rapidly in patterns of shock and disbelief. The human student was not simply recounting events from the simulation, she was explaining the psychological and cultural factors that had influenced each commander's decision-making process. The audience sat in stunned silence as Hannah continued her reconstruction. She described fleet movements with perfect accuracy, explained tactical decisions with insight that surpassed professional military analysts, and predicted strategic developments that would not occur for hundreds of hours. The supply disruption, That appeared to be accidental sabotage in Hour 134 was actually a deliberate strategic sacrifice by Admiral Ventok, she explained. His species places cultural value on honorable defeat over tactical retreat. By allowing his supply lines to be compromised, he created conditions that would force his commanders to fight with desperate courage rather than calculated caution. Holographic display continued to follow her words perfectly, showing battles that had taken place deep within the simulation's timeline. Ships exploded in brilliant flashes of light. Supply convoys moved through dangerous space lanes, and tactical formations shifted with the fluid precision of actual warfare. But what amazed the audience most was not just her perfect recall of events. Hannah was simultaneously analyzing the decisions of 12 different fleet commanders, explaining their reasoning, predicting their actions, and connecting tactical choices made hundreds of hours apart. Admiral Yex's decision to abandon the mineral processing stations in Hour 243 appears wasteful, she continued. But when combined with the supply route established by Admiral Kren in Hour 36 and the gravitational calculations that Admiral Mora had been developing since Hour 91, it created the foundation for the coordinated assault that would determine the final outcome in Hour 712. Du Jin, the talented Mandari student, found himself struggling to follow the connections Hannah was making. Even with his enhanced mental abilities, he could not track the complex web of relationships she was describing across such vast timescales. Minho, with all his mathematical precision, realized that the calculations involved in tracking 12 simultaneous command decisions across 800 hours would challenge the Academy's most advanced computer systems. The psychological turning point, Hannah explained, occurred in Hour 456, when Admiral Kren received false intelligence about enemy fleet strength. His response reveals the fundamental difference between logical, tactical thinking and intuitive strategic understanding. She manipulated the holographic display with casual precision, showing the moment when intercepted communications had led to a critical command decision. The image quality was perfect, the tactical details were accurate, and the analysis was deeper than anything the audience had ever witnessed. Admiral Kren's logical response would have been to verify the intelligence and adjust his strategy accordingly, Hannah continued. However, his past experience with similar deception tactics during the Outer Rim campaigns influenced him to make an intuitive decision that contradicted apparent evidence. The display showed the controversial decision in question. Admiral Kren had committed his reserve forces to what appeared to be a hopeless assault, but Hannah's analysis revealed the subtle strategic thinking that had guided his choice. By analyzing Admiral Kren's psychological profile, his cultural background, and his previous tactical decisions, we can see that he recognized the intelligence as deliberate misinformation. His seemingly reckless assault was actually a calculated response to manipulation attempts by Admiral Zex's intelligence specialists. Professor Jorik realized that Hannah was not just analyzing the simulation data. She was thinking like each commander individually, understanding their personal motivations, cultural influences, and psychological patterns. For 3 hours, she continued this impossible demonstration. She reconstructed battles that had occurred in Hour 200, explained supply decisions made in Hour 400, and predicted tactical developments that would not become relevant until Hour 600. The audience watched in growing amazement as she demonstrated perfect knowledge of every significant event across the entire 800. But more importantly, she was explaining the reasoning behind every decision with insight that seemed to exceed the understanding of the original commanders themselves. The final phase began in Hour 781, she explained, when the accumulated effects of decisions made throughout the engagement reached critical convergence. Admiral Moraz's encirclement pattern, which had been developing since Hour 12, finally achieved tactical relevance. The holographic display showed the climactic battles with stunning visual clarity. Multiple fleets engaged simultaneously across different star systems, their actions coordinated by strategic decisions made hundreds of hours earlier. The outcome was determined by 3 key factors, Hannah concluded. Admiral Kren's intuitive recognition of false intelligence, Admiral Moraz's patient development of cultural tactical patterns, and Admiral Ventok's deliberate sacrifice of tactical advantages to maintain strategic honor. She paused for the first time in 3 hours, looking calmly at the stunned audience. The simulation ended with Admiral Kren's coalition achieving victory through combined strategic thinking that transcended individual species' tactical limitations. Total engagement time, 847 hours, 14 minutes, and 32 seconds. The holographic display showed final statistics that matched her prediction with perfect accuracy. Every detail was correct, every timeline was precise, and every tactical analysis was validated by the simulation's actual outcomes. The room remained silent for several long moments. Faculty members stared at each other in disbelief. Graduate students who had spent years studying military tactics looked shocked by the depth of analysis they had witnessed. Professor Jorik's tentacles moved in patterns that indicated profound amazement and confusion. In his decades of teaching and military analysis, he had never encountered anything approaching what he had just observed. Commander Veltar was the first to find his voice. How did you do this? Hannah looked genuinely puzzled by the question, as if the answer should be obvious. I watched the simulation and remembered what happened. She replied simply. Then I explained what I remembered and why it happened that way. The casual nature of her response only made her achievement more stunning. She had accomplished something that professional military analysts considered impossible, and she seemed completely unaware that her performance was extraordinary. In the back of the room, Tae Min sat in shocked silence, his forearms motionless. For the first time anyone could remember, his confidence in species-based intellectual superiority had been completely shattered by what he had witnessed. The quiet human girl had just demonstrated capabilities that none of them had imagined possible. The stunned silence in Classroom 7 Alpha stretched for what felt like hours. Faculty members looked at each other with expressions of complete bewilderment. Graduate students who had dedicated their lives to military analysis struggled to process what they had just witnessed. Professor Jorik was the first to recover his composure, though his tentacles continued moving in patterns that betrayed his deep confusion. Miss Kim, he said slowly, what you have just demonstrated goes far beyond standard simulation analysis. You have reconstructed not just events, but the thinking processes of 12 different commanders. Hannah nodded, as if this observation was perfectly ordinary. Yes, you have to understand how each commander thinks if you want to predict what they will do next. But how? Asked Dr. Kelvar, a senior faculty member who specialized in military psychology. Understanding the decision-making patterns of a single commander requires years of study and direct observation. You have just demonstrated intimate knowledge of 12 different individuals' thought processes. I watched how they made decisions, Hannah replied. After you see enough of someone's choices, you can understand their reasons for making those choices. Commander Veltar stepped forward, his scaled features showing deep concern. Miss Kim, the level of psychological analysis you just demonstrated would normally require access to personal files, psychological profiles, and detailed cultural background information. How did you obtain such comprehensive knowledge of each commander's motivations? Hannah looked genuinely confused by the question. I watched their decisions in the simulation. Every choice someone makes tells you something about how they think. If you pay attention to enough choices, you can understand their whole approach to Bilselving. Su Jin, the normally quiet Vorthok professor, spoke up with obvious amazement. You are describing a level of psychological insight that exceeds our most advanced analytical techniques. The ability to reconstruct personality profiles from observed decisions alone is theoretically possible, but practically impossible. It is not difficult, Hannah said simply. People make decisions based on their experiences, their culture, and their personal values. If you understand those factors, you can predict their future choices. The audience buzzed with quiet conversations. As the implications of her words sank in, what she was describing casually was a form of psychological analysis that professional military intelligence specialists spent their entire careers trying to perfect. Tae Min, who had remained silent throughout the discussion, finally found his voice. This is impossible, he declared, his forearms moving in agitation. No single individual can simultaneously understand the psychological patterns of 12 different commanders from different species and cultures. Hannah turned to look at him with the same calm expression she had maintained throughout her presentation. Why not? The simple question hung in the air like a challenge. Tae Min struggled to find a logical response that would explain why such analysis was impossible. Because, he said finally, each species has unique psychological patterns, cultural influences, and decision-making processes. Understanding one requires specialized study. Understanding 12 simultaneously is beyond any individual's cognitive capacity. But they are all just people making decisions, Hannah replied. The reasons might be different, but the process is the same. You look at the situation, consider your options, and choose what seems best based on your experience and beliefs. Professor Jorik's tentacles moved rapidly as he processed her words. Miss Kim, you are describing the ability to think like multiple species simultaneously. This suggests a form of cognitive flexibility that we have never encountered before. I just try to understand why people do what they do, she said. It does not matter if they are human or Krillian or Mindari. Everyone has reasons for their choices. Yuki Sato, who had spent weeks worrying about the human student's academic struggles, finally understood what she had been observing. Been studying all of us, she said with sudden realization. Every day in class, you have been learning how different species think and make decisions. Hannah nodded. Yes, it is very interesting. Krillians like logical sequences and systematic analysis. Mindari use their enhanced mental abilities to find connections between ideas. Vorthok prefer statistical approaches and long-term planning. Each species has patterns that make sense once you understand their background. The room fell silent again as the audience grasped the full implications of what she was saying. The quiet human girl who had seemed to be struggling with basic coursework had actually been conducting sophisticated psychological analysis of every species in the classroom. Dr. Wu Jin, the academy's commandant, had been observing from the back of the room. Now he stepped forward with an expression of profound concern. Ms. Kim, what you are describing represents a form of intelligence that we have never encountered before. The ability to simultaneously understand and predict the behavior of multiple species suggests capabilities that could revolutionize military strategy. I do not understand, Hannah replied. I just pay attention to how people think and make decisions. Anyone can do this if they watch carefully enough. No, Professor Jorek said firmly. Anyone cannot do this. What you have demonstrated today is beyond the capabilities of any known species. You have shown perfect recall of 800 hours of complex data, psychological insight that exceeds professional analysts, and the ability to think like 12 different commanders simultaneously. He paused, his tentacles moving in patterns of deep thought. Miss Kim, I must ask you directly. Did you receive any assistance with this analysis? Did you use advanced computer systems or collaborate with other students? Hannah looked slightly hurt by the suggestion. No, I worked alone. I watched the simulation and took notes in my notebook. She held up the simple notebook she had carried throughout the semester. It was filled with handwritten notes in basic human script, showing no signs of advanced technology or outside assistance. Commander Veltar examined the notebook with growing amazement. These are just basic observations about tactical decisions, he said. There are no complex calculations, no computer analysis, no advanced strategic frameworks. How did you derive such sophisticated insights from such simple notes? I wrote down what I observed, Hannah explained. Then I thought about why each commander made those choices. The patterns became clear after I understood their different approaches to problem solving. The implications were staggering. She had accomplished what teams of professional analysts could not do, using nothing more than careful observation, basic note-taking, and her own cognitive abilities. Minho, who had been silent throughout the discussion, suddenly spoke up. You said, you can understand how any species thinks. Can you predict what I will do in a tactical situation? Hannah looked at him thoughtfully. You prefer mathematical solutions and logical progression. In a tactical situation, you would analyze all available data, calculate probabilities for different outcomes, and choose the option with the highest mathematical chance of success. You would also consider backup plans based on statistical analysis of potential problems. Minho's eyes widened with shock. She had just described his exact approach to tactical thinking with perfect accuracy. Now do me, challenged Yuki Sato. You'd like to consider long-term consequences and multiple variables, Hannah replied immediately. You would spend time analyzing how each decision might affect future options. You would choose strategies that maintain flexibility and avoid commitments that might limit future choices. Yuki stared at her in amazement. The description was completely accurate. One by one, other students requested similar analysis. In each case, Hannah provided precise descriptions of their tactical thinking patterns, cultural influences, and decision-making processes. The audience realized they were witnessing something unprecedented in galactic history. The quiet human girl was not just intelligent in a conventional sense. She possessed the ability to understand and predict the behavior of other species better than those species understood themselves. Professor Jorek's tentacles moved in patterns of profound recognition. Miss Kim, he said slowly, I believe you have just demonstrated the most significant development in military strategic thinking in recorded galactic history. Hannah looked puzzled by all the attention her simple presentation had generated. To her, she had just completed a school assignment by watching carefully and thinking about what she observed. She had no idea that her abilities would soon change the entire galaxy's understanding of human potential. Word of Hannah Kim's extraordinary presentation spread through the Galactic Military Academy like wildfire. Within hours, faculty members from every department were requesting copies of her analysis. By the end of the day, senior military officials from across the galaxy were demanding detailed reports about the human students' capabilities. Professor Jorek found himself at the center of a storm of academic and military interest that he had never experienced in his distinguished career. His office was flooded with communication requests from strategic planning departments, military intelligence agencies, and research institutions throughout known space. But the most significant response came from Admiral Vexara, the Supreme Commander of Galactic Defense Forces and the most respected military strategist in the galaxy. Her personal message was brief but carried enormous weight. I will arrive tomorrow to observe this human student personally. The next morning, Classroom 7 Alpha was transformed. Security personnel had swept the area multiple times. Senior faculty members filled every available seat. Military officials in dress uniforms lined the walls. The holographic display system had been upgraded with the most advanced equipment available. Admiral Vexera entered precisely on schedule. Her presence commanded immediate respect from everyone in the room. The tall, imposing Altarian had earned her reputation through brilliant, strategic thinking during the border wars and was considered the finest military mind of her generation. Hannah Kim arrived for class at her usual time, carrying her simple notebook and showing no reaction to the unprecedented security and attention surrounding her. She took her customary seat in the back of the room and waited quietly for class to begin. Admiral Vexera studied the human student carefully. After decades of evaluating military talent, she prided herself on the ability to assess capabilities quickly and accurately. What she saw puzzled her, a young woman who appeared completely ordinary by galactic standards. "Miss Kim," the Admiral said, her voice carrying the authority of absolute command. "I have reviewed your analysis of the Epsilon Sector simulation. Your work demonstrates capabilities that our most advanced military strategists consider theoretically impossible." Hannah nodded politely, but said nothing. "I want to test these capabilities under controlled conditions," Admiral Vexera continued. "I have brought classified strategic scenarios that have challenged our best analysts for years. Will you examine them?" "Yes," Admiral Anna replied simply. The Admiral activated a secure data storage device that contains some of the most complex strategic problems in galactic military history. These were real situations that had occurred during actual conflicts, not simulations or academic exercises. "This scenario," she began, "involves the defense of the Kepler installation against simultaneous attacks by 3 different enemy fleets. Our strategic planning department has spent 2 years analyzing possible defensive options without reaching satisfactory conclusions." The holographic display showed a star system with multiple planets, asteroid fields, and defensive installations. 3 enemy fleets approached from different vectors, each using different tactical doctrines and cultural approaches to warfare. Hannah studied the display for several minutes, her dark eyes moving systematically across the complex tactical situation. The room remained silent as everyone waited to see how she would respond to this real strategic challenge. "The hegemony fleet approaching from the north vector will arrive first," she said finally. "Their cultural emphasis on honor-based combat means they will engage the primary defensive positions directly, expecting traditional fleet-to-fleet battle." She manipulated the display, highlighting specific formations and movement patterns. The consortium forces coming from the east prefer economic efficiency over military glory. They will avoid direct engagement until they can identify the most cost-effective targets for maximum strategic impact. Her analysis continued with the same calm precision she had demonstrated in her previous presentation. The nomad clans approaching from the south operate under completely different cultural principles. They view warfare as a test of individual skill rather than strategic planning. Their attack patterns will appear random but will actually follow traditional hunting techniques, adapted for space combat. Admiral Vexera watched with growing amazement as Hannah provided detailed analysis of each enemy fleet's probable actions, based entirely on cultural understanding and psychological profiling. The defensive strategy, Hannah continued, should exploit the fundamental differences between these 3 approaches. The hegemony fleet's honor-based tactics can be redirected by presenting false targets that appear prestigious but are actually disadvantageous. The consortium forces can be delayed by creating economic uncertainty about target values. The nomad clans can be scattered by disrupting their pack hunting patterns. She demonstrated each strategic recommendation with precise tactical details, showing exactly how defensive forces should be positioned and coordinated to maximum effect. By understanding how each enemy group thinks and makes decisions, she concluded, the defenders can predict their actions and counter them before they become effective. Admiral Vexera stared at the holographic display in stunned silence. Hannah had just solved in minutes a strategic problem that had challenged the galaxy's best military minds for 2 years. "How long did our strategic planning department spend analyzing this scenario?" the Admiral asked Professor Jorick quietly. 2 years, with teams of specialists in advanced computer modeling, he replied, "and she solved it in less than 15 minutes by understanding the psychology of different cultures." Admiral Vexera said with obvious amazement, but Hannah was not finished. Without being asked, she began describing alternative scenarios. If the enemy fleets had coordinated their attack timing differently, she explained, the defensive requirements would change completely. She modified the holographic display to show different approach vectors and timing sequences. With synchronized arrival, the cultural differences become advantages rather than weaknesses. The hegemony's direct assault provides cover for the consortium's economic targeting, while the nomad clans exploit the chaos created by both. She demonstrated how the same enemy forces could achieve victory simply by adjusting their coordination and timing. The key to defeating any enemy, she said, is understanding how they think and why they make specific choices. Once you understand their decision-making process, You can predict their actions and prepare appropriate responses. Admiral Vexera realized she was witnessing something unprecedented in galactic military history. The human student was not just analyzing tactical situations. She was demonstrating the ability to think like multiple different species simultaneously, understanding their cultural influences, psychological patterns, and strategic preferences better than they understood themselves. Miss Kim, the Admiral said slowly, what you have just demonstrated represents a revolution in strategic thinking. The ability to simultaneously understand and predict the behavior of multiple cultures could change the nature of warfare itself. Hannah looked genuinely puzzled by the Admiral's reaction. But this is just normal thinking, she said. Everyone tries to understand why other people do what they do. No, Admiral Vexera replied firmly. Not everyone can do this. What you have shown us today is a uniquely human ability that we have never encountered before. She turned to address the room full of military officials and faculty members. Gentlemen and ladies, I believe we have discovered something of extraordinary significance. Humans possess cognitive abilities that allow them to understand and predict the behavior of other species with unprecedented accuracy. This represents a strategic advantage that could reshape galactic military thinking. Over the following weeks, Hannah Kim became the subject of intensive study by military strategists, psychologists, and cognitive researchers from across the galaxy. But every test and evaluation reached the same conclusion. Her abilities were not unique to her personally, but represented the natural cognitive capabilities of human beings. Humans, it turned out, had evolved as social creatures capable of understanding and predicting the behavior of other humans with remarkable precision. When applied to alien species, this same ability allowed them to think like multiple cultures simultaneously, understanding psychological patterns and cultural influences that other species could not perceive. The quiet human girl who had sat in the back of the classroom had inadvertently revealed humanity's greatest strength, not superior technology or enhanced physical abilities, but the uniquely human capacity for empathy, cultural understanding, and psychological insight. The galaxy would never underestimate human intelligence again. Admiral Vexera's final report to the Galactic Defense Council summarized the discovery. In simple terms, humans do not just learn about other species, they learn to think like them. This ability makes them the most effective strategic analysts we have ever encountered. Hannah Kim returned to her quiet life as a student, still carrying her simple notebook and maintaining the same calm demeanor that had characterized her throughout the entire experience. She remained largely unaware that her presentation had fundamentally changed how the galaxy viewed human capabilities. But in military academies, strategic planning departments, and diplomatic corps throughout known space, a new understanding was taking hold. The species that had seemed least impressive by galactic standards possessed the most valuable military ability of all, the power to truly understand their enemies. The human factor had entered galactic strategic thinking, and nothing would ever be the same.